I stood frozen on the graduation stage at Northwestern University diploma, clutched in my sweaty palm as my father's hand connected with my cheek in front of 3,000 witnesses. The crack echoed through the auditorium like a gunshot. "You don't deserve that degree." Robert Augustus spat, his voice dripping with venom that could poison a lake. My mother Patricia's shrill scream cut through the stunned silence that followed. "You're just a failure in a gown." The entire auditorium gasped collectively, a sound like air being sucked from the room. Security guards in navy blazers rushed forward from the wings. I felt the burn of humiliation spreading across my face like wildfire as camera flashes exploded and dozens of phones captured every devastating second of what should have been my proudest moment. My name is Augustus, and that moment on stage destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. But to understand why my parents erupted like Mount Vesuvius at my graduation, you need to know the secret I'd been carrying for 4 years. Growing up in the manicured suburbs of Naperville, Illinois, my childhood was mapped out with the precision of a military operation. My parents, Robert and Patricia Augustus, weren't just demanding parents. They were architects of destiny, constructors of legacy, builders of dreams that belonged entirely to them. My father ran a successful cardiology practice, and my mother managed the administrative side with ruthless efficiency. Together, they formed an empire of expectations that suffocated creativity and crushed individual thought. My older brother Marcus had already fulfilled their medical dynasty dreams. He graduated from Harvard Medical School 2 years earlier and now worked alongside Dad at the practice. Golden Boy Marcus could do no wrong. Every family dinner became a celebration of his achievements. Every conversation circled back to his surgical successes. Every phone call with relatives highlighted his promising future. Then there was me, the spare heir, the backup plan. The son who would solidify the Augustus medical legacy by becoming a surgeon just like Marcus. Just like Dad, just like they'd planned since I could walk. For 4 years at Northwestern, I lived a double life that would make CIA operatives jealous. My parents believed I was pursuing pre-med with a biology major, following the exact path they'd outlined during countless family meetings around our granite kitchen island. They funded my education believing they were investing in another Dr. Augustus. They bragged to their country club friends about their second son following the family tradition. They introduced me at medical conferences as their future surgeon. But every morning, instead of walking into organic chemistry or anatomy classes, I headed to the journalism building. Instead of memorizing the cardiovascular system, I learned investigative techniques. Instead of studying for the MCAT, I was mastering interview skills and fact-checking procedures. I maintained perfect grades in journalism while creating an elaborate fiction about my medical studies. The deception required incredible energy. I memorized medical textbook chapters just to discuss them convincingly at dinner. I attended pre-med study groups occasionally to maintain appearances. I even went to medical conference exhibits with my parents, nodding along as they discussed my future specialty. Meanwhile, I was building a portfolio of investigative articles, developing sources in local government, and dreaming of exposing corruption and telling stories that mattered. My girlfriend Sarah knew the truth. She was my anchor in this storm of lies, constantly reminding me that my happiness mattered more than my parents' expectations. But even she worried about the eventual reckoning. "Augustus, you can't keep this up forever," she'd whispered during our late-night study sessions at the campus coffee shop. "What happens when they find out?" I always promised I'd tell them after graduation. I thought I could present my journalism degree as an accomplished fact, show them my published articles, explain my passion for uncovering truth and protecting the vulnerable. I believed that seeing my success might soften their disappointment. I was criminally naive. The explosion happened 20 minutes before the ceremony began. My parents sat in the third row of the auditorium, beaming with pride as they waited to watch their second son graduate with what they assumed was a pre-med degree. My mother wore her pearl necklace and navy dress, the same outfit she'd worn to Marcus's graduation. My father sported his lucky tie, the one he claimed brought good fortune to important family events. That's when Patricia decided to review the graduation program one final time. I watched from backstage as her face transformed from maternal pride to confusion to absolute rage. She grabbed Robert's arm with enough force to leave bruises and pointed to the printed page. There in black and white under Bachelor of Science in Journalism, Mystique, was my name. The 20 minutes that followed became a masterclass in parental fury. They demanded to speak with university administration. They accused the printing company of making errors. They convinced themselves this had to be a mistake because their son would never betray them so completely. But when they cornered my academic advisor, Professor Williams, backstage, and he confirmed my major, explained my academic achievements in journalism, and praised my investigative work, the truth hit them like a freight train carrying dynamite. 4 years. My mother kept repeating, her voice rising to hysteria levels. 4 years of lies. 4 years of wasted money. 4 years of humiliation. My father's response was colder, more calculated. "He's dead to us," he announced to Professor Williams, as if declaring Augustus Augustus no longer existed. "We have one son now. Marcus is our only child." But they couldn't leave it at that. Public humiliation required public punishment. When my name was called during the ceremony, I walked across that stage believing I might still salvage some dignity from this disaster. Maybe they'd realized their overreaction. Maybe they'd remembered they loved me despite their disappointment. Instead, they climbed onto the stage like avenging angels seeking retribution. The slap echoed through my skull, rattling my teeth and sending shockwaves down my spine. But the words hurt worse than any physical blow. "You don't deserve that degree because you earned it through deception," my father declared loud enough for the back rows to hear clearly. "You're not our son anymore." My mother's follow-up felt like emotional napalm. "You're just a failure in a gown who threw away a real future for worthless paper." Security escorted them from the building while 3,000 people watched in stunned silence. I stood on that stage diploma, trembling in my hand, fighting back tears of rage and shame. This was supposed to be my moment of triumph. Instead, it became my moment of total devastation. But as I walked off that stage, something crystallized inside me. The humiliation transformed into determination. The shame morphed into resolve. They wanted to destroy me publicly. They thought journalism was worthless. They believed they could simply erase 4 years of my passion and hard work. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had no idea what I would do next. 3 hours later, I sat in my cramped studio apartment near campus, still wearing my graduation gown, like some twisted reminder of the day's catastrophe. Sarah perched on the edge of my secondhand couch, holding a bag of frozen peas against my still swollen cheek, where my father's palm had left its mark. The throbbing pain was nothing compared to the humiliation burning in my chest like acid. "I can't believe they actually hit you," Sarah whispered, her green eyes filled with tears she was trying not to shed. "In front of everyone. Augustus, that was assault. You could press charges." I shook my head, wincing at the movement. Charging my own father won't solve anything. It'll just give them more ammunition to paint me as vindictive. But even as I said those words, something didn't feel right. During my 4 years of journalism training, I'd developed instincts about when people were hiding information. My parents' reaction seemed too extreme, too desperate, even for control freaks like them. Yes, they were disappointed about my major, but the level of rage suggested something deeper was happening. That's when I remembered the mail situation. For the past 6 months, I'd been applying to journalism positions at major newspapers and magazines across the country. Chicago Tribune, Washington Post, New York Times, CNN, you name it. I'd sent dozens of applications, submitted portfolio after portfolio, and reached out to countless contacts I'd made through internships and networking events. The response had been devastating silence. Not a single reply, not even form rejection letters. In an industry where communication is everything, the complete lack of response seemed impossible. "Sarah, hand me my laptop," I said, sudden urgency flooding my voice. She looked puzzled but complied. I opened my email and began scrolling through sent messages from the past 6 months. Everything was there: cover letters, resume attachments, follow-up emails, thank you notes after interviews. But the responses folder remained empty except for automated confirmation messages. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, pulling up my journalism school's job board. Professor Williams said the Tribune was specifically looking for someone with my background. Why wouldn't they at least acknowledge my application? That's when a terrible possibility occurred to me. My parents had insisted on being my emergency contacts throughout college. They had access to my permanent address information. More importantly, they'd helped me set up mail forwarding from their house to my apartment when I moved off campus sophomore year. My hands trembled as I logged into the mail forwarding service. What I found made my blood freeze in my veins. Every single piece of mail addressed to me had been intercepted and rerouted to my parents' house instead of my apartment. For 8 months, they'd been controlling my postal communications without my knowledge. "Those manipulative monsters," I breathed, staring at the screen in disbelief. "They've been stealing my mail." But the revelation went deeper than simple mail theft. I still had remote access to my father's computer from high school when he'd asked me to help with tech support. In my rage and desperation, I decided to check if my suspicions were correct. What I found in a hidden folder labeled "Augustus Problem" destroyed any remaining illusion I had about my parents' love or integrity. Dozens of documents filled the folder. Job rejection letters written on official letterheads from newspapers and magazines where I'd applied. Emails sent from fake accounts using my name, withdrawing applications and declining interview opportunities. Form letters explaining that I was no longer interested in journalism positions due to family medical emergencies. But the worst discovery was a series of communications my parents had sent directly to my professors. "Dear Professor Williams," one email read, "We are writing to express serious concerns about our son Augustus's mental health. He has been exhibiting erratic behavior, and we believe his journalism studies may be contributing to paranoid thoughts and conspiracy theories. We would appreciate your assistance in encouraging him to seek psychiatric evaluation." Another message sent to the department head claimed I'd been struggling with substance abuse and asked that my grades be monitored carefully for signs of academic dishonesty. They hadn't just been sabotaging my job search, they'd been trying to destroy my academic reputation from the inside. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Professor Williams. I answered with shaking hands. "Augustus, I'm so sorry about what happened at graduation." His familiar voice carried genuine concern. "I've been thinking about our conversation backstage with your parents, and I need to tell you something important." "What is it, Professor?" "Your parents contacted me multiple times over the past year. They claimed you were having mental health issues and asked me to monitor your behavior. They suggested your journalism interests were signs of instability. I didn't take their concerns seriously because your work was exemplary, but now I realize they were trying to sabotage your academic standing." The room spun around me like I was trapped in a washing machine. "They tried to convince you I was crazy." "They also contacted several news organizations where you applied for internships last summer. I found out because the Tribune's hiring manager mentioned it to me at a conference. Your parents called claiming you'd been hospitalized for psychiatric issues and couldn't fulfill any professional obligations." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. My parents hadn't just been disappointed about my career choice. They'd been actively working to destroy any possibility of success in journalism. They'd been waging psychological warfare against me for over a year, using their medical credentials and social connections to paint me as unstable and unreliable. "Professor Williams," I said, my voice steadying with newfound resolve, I need to ask you something important. In your professional opinion, based on 4 years of working with me, do I show any signs of mental instability or substance abuse? Absolutely not, Augustus. You're one of the most focused, ethical, and mentally sharp students I've ever taught. Your investigative work has been exceptional, and your commitment to truth and accuracy is unwavering. What your parents did was character assassination, plain and simple. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of their betrayal. This wasn't just about controlling my career path. They'd tried to destroy my reputation, my relationships with professors, and my professional credibility before I even graduated. But they'd made one crucial mistake. In their desperation to sabotage my journalism career, they'd underestimated the very skills they were trying to suppress. 4 years of investigative training had taught me how to uncover hidden information, trace financial records, and expose corruption. If they wanted to play dirty, I was about to show them what a real investigative journalist could do. Sarah noticed the change in my expression. Augustus, you're scaring me. What are you thinking? I looked at her with new determination burning in my chest. I'm thinking my parents just declared war on the wrong person. They have no idea what they've unleashed. But as I stared at those damning emails and fabricated rejection letters, a larger question nagged at my mind. Why were they so desperate to control my future? What were they so afraid of that they'd risk destroying their own son's reputation? The answer to that question would prove more shocking than anything I'd discovered so far. The next morning, I woke up with the methodical mindset of an investigative reporter who'd stumbled onto the story of a lifetime. Sarah had spent the night, and I could hear her making coffee in the tiny kitchen while I sat cross-legged on my bed laptop, balanced on my knees, surrounded by printed emails and documents like some conspiracy theorist's fever dream. But this wasn't a conspiracy theory. This was family betrayal with evidence to back it up. Okay, Augustus, I muttered to myself, cracking my knuckles. Time to find out what Robert and Patricia Augustus are really hiding. My journalism training had taught me that extreme behavior usually stems from extreme pressure. People don't risk everything to maintain control unless they're protecting something valuable or dangerous. My parents' desperate attempts to sabotage my career suggested they were afraid of something specific about my investigative abilities. I started with basic financial research, the kind of public records investigation I'd done dozens of times for class projects. Property records, business filings, tax assessments, anything that might reveal their economic situation. What I found painted a picture that didn't match their lifestyle. My parents lived in a $2 million house in Naperville's most exclusive neighborhood. They drove matching BMW sedans belonging to the Medina Country Club and took European vacations twice a year. My mother wore designer clothes and real jewelry, while my father collected expensive wines and vintage watches. But according to the public financial records I could access, their income didn't support this level of spending. The cardiology practice generated good revenue, but not extraordinary wealth. After business expenses, malpractice insurance, employee salaries, and taxes, their legitimate income should have supported a comfortable middle-class lifestyle, not the luxury they displayed. I dug deeper using databases and research techniques Professor Williams had taught us for investigating white-collar crime. Medical practices have multiple revenue streams: patient fees, insurance reimbursements, partnership agreements, and often charitable fund management. That's where I found the first red flag. Augustus Cardiology Associates managed the donation fund for the Children's Hospital of Chicago. The practice collected charitable contributions from wealthy patients and community members, then distributed those funds to help families cover medical expenses for sick children. According to their most recent public filing, the charity fund contained over $800,000 in donations. But when I cross-referenced the fund's reported distributions with the hospital's records of received donations, the numbers didn't match. The practice claimed to have distributed $600,000 to families in need over the past 2 years. But the hospital's records showed they'd received only $400,000 during that same period. $200,000 had vanished somewhere between my parents' practice and sick children's medical bills. My hands shook as I realized what I was uncovering. My parents weren't just controlling and manipulative. They were thieves, stealing money from families dealing with their children's life-threatening illnesses. I called Sarah over to look at the spreadsheets I'd created comparing the reported donations versus actual hospital receipts. "This can't be right," she whispered, scanning the numbers. "Your parents are doctors. They took an oath to help people not steal from sick children." But the evidence was undeniable. I'd found systematic discrepancies dating back 3 years. Small amounts at first, maybe 5 or 10,000 here and there. But the theft had escalated dramatically in recent months with single, disappeared donations reaching $30,000 and $40,000. That explained their luxury lifestyle. They were supplementing their legitimate income with stolen charity money. But it didn't explain their desperate attempts to control my future. Why would they care about my career choice if they were already successfully embezzling funds? I needed to understand their long-term strategy. Breaking into their computer system again felt like crossing a line, but they'd already violated my privacy and sabotaged my career. I justified the invasion as necessary fact-gathering for what was becoming a criminal investigation. What I found in my father's personal files made my previous discoveries look like small-time theft. Hidden in a folder labeled Retirement Planning, I discovered their exit strategy: bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, property purchases in Costa Rica, new passport applications under slightly altered names, investment portfolios in offshore accounts. They weren't just stealing money, they were preparing to disappear. The timeline became clear as I read through their communications with foreign financial advisors and real estate agents. They planned to work for 2 more years, continuing to embezzle from the charity fund while establishing their escape route. Then they'd claim early retirement due to health concerns, liquidate their American assets, and move to Costa Rica, where they'd already purchased a luxury compound overlooking the Pacific Ocean. But the most chilling discovery was a document titled Family Considerations. Marcus Integration Essential for Legitimacy Maintenance. One section read, "His reputation and medical credentials provide cover for fund management expansion. Gradual transition to full operational control advisable." They weren't just planning to escape. They were planning to leave Marcus holding responsibility for their crimes. Another section made my blood run cold. Augustus Journalism Risk Assessment, Investigative Skills, pose significant threat to operational security. Recommend continued interference with career development until departure timeline complete. They'd been sabotaging my journalism career because they knew I had the skills to expose their crimes. But the final section revealed something even more sinister. Insurance policy, Augustus blame assignment protocols established. Documentary evidence prepared for law enforcement redirection if exposure occurs before departure. They'd been preparing to frame me for their crimes. I found the evidence they'd manufactured to support this backup plan. Forged signatures on charity fund documents, bank account information with my name attached, email communications made to look like I'd been involved in the financial management. If their theft was discovered before they could escape to Costa Rica, they planned to claim I'd been the mastermind using my journalism skills to manipulate charity donations while studying journalism as a cover story for my real criminal intentions. My parents hadn't just been controlling my life, they'd been setting me up as their fall guy. The scope of their betrayal was so vast, so calculated, so evil, that I sat staring at the computer screen for 30 minutes without moving. Sarah found me like that, tears streaming down my face, surrounded by printed evidence of my parents' crimes. "They were going to destroy me completely," I whispered. "Not just my career, but my entire life. They were going to send me to prison for their crimes." Sarah read over my shoulder, her face growing pale as she absorbed the magnitude of what I'd uncovered. "Augustus, you have to call the police right now. This is evidence of major crimes. But I shook my head. Not yet. They're smart, and they have powerful connections. If I go to the police now with what I have, they'll claim I manufactured this evidence out of revenge for graduation. They'll say I'm the unstable son they've been worried about, just like they told my professors. I needed more than financial records and computer files. I needed them to confess their crimes in a way that couldn't be disputed or explained away. And I had an idea that would give me exactly that. For 3 days, I wrestled with the most difficult decision of my life. I had enough evidence to expose my parents' crimes, but taking that step would destroy my family completely and probably send 2 people I'd once loved to prison for decades. Despite everything they'd done to me, despite their betrayal and manipulation and theft, they were still my parents. They'd raised me, taught me to ride a bike, attended my little league games, helped with homework. The cognitive dissonance between those memories and their current criminal behavior created an emotional whirlwind that made clear thinking almost impossible. Sarah tried to support me through the decision, but I could see the conflict in her eyes too. She loved me and wanted to see justice for the way I'd been treated. But she also understood the weight of turning in your own family. You don't owe them protection, she reminded me during one of our marathon conversations about what to do next. They made their choices. They stole from sick children Augustus. They were prepared to send you to prison to cover their crimes. But knowing she was right didn't make the decision easier. The breakthrough came on Thursday evening when I was reviewing the charity fund documents one more time, looking for any detail I might have missed. That's when I noticed something that made my heart stop. The most recent forged signature wasn't mine. It was Marcus's. My brother had unknowingly signed documents that would make him appear responsible for the charity fund management. Recent bank transfers had been authorized with his legitimate signature on forms he probably thought were routine practice paperwork. They weren't just planning to frame me anymore. They were setting up Marcus too. I called my brother immediately, my hand shaking, as I dialed his number. "Hey, little brother." Marcus answered, his voice warm and friendly like always. "Congratulations on graduation. I heard there was some drama with Mom and Dad, but I haven't had a chance to get the full story. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay," he said, his tone becoming more serious. "What's going on? Have you been signing any unusual paperwork for the practice lately? Anything involving the Children's Hospital Charity Fund?" "You mean in Detroit?" There was a long pause. "Actually, yes. Dad had me sign some fund management documents last week. He said they were updating the administrative procedures and needed my signature as a partner in the practice." "Why?" My stomach dropped into my shoes. "What exactly did you sign?" "I don't know all the details. There were maybe a dozen forms, something about fund distribution protocols and financial oversight responsibilities." "Augustus, you're scaring me. What's this about?" I realized I had to tell him everything. My brother was walking into a trap, and he had no idea his signature was being used to legitimize stolen money. "Marcus, I need you to sit down. I'm about to tell you something that's going to change everything you think you know about our parents." Over the next hour, I laid out everything I'd discovered. The charity fund theft, the forged documents, the planned escape to Costa Rica, the evidence they'd manufactured to frame both of us. Marcus listened in stunned silence, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly just absorbing the magnitude of what I was revealing. "This is impossible," he finally said when I'd finished. "They're our parents, Augustus. They're respected doctors. They wouldn't steal from sick children." "I'm going to send you copies of everything I found," I told him. "Look at the evidence and tell me if you still think I'm wrong." That night, Marcus called back after reviewing the documents. His voice was hollow, defeated, like someone who just learned their entire life was built on lies. "They're really planning to frame us for their crimes," he said. "I found additional paperwork in the office that makes me look like I've been managing the charity fund for months. My signature is on documents I never saw authorizing transfers I never approved." But then he told me something that made the situation infinitely worse. Augustus, they're accelerating their timeline. I overheard Dad on the phone today talking about finalizing some kind of arrangement. He said something about 72 hours and clean exit protocols. My blood turned to ice. They're leaving this weekend. It sounds like it. And there's something else. Mom asked me to sign more documents tomorrow, something about updating my power of attorney for practice management. I think they're trying to transfer legal responsibility to me before they disappear. The moral dilemma crystallized with perfect clarity. If I didn't act immediately, my parents would escape to Costa Rica with stolen money while leaving Marcus and me to face criminal charges for their crimes. Hundreds of families dealing with children's medical crises would never recover the money stolen from them. This was no longer about family loyalty or forgiveness. This was about preventing innocent people from being destroyed by my parents' greed and cowardice. Marcus, we have to stop them, I said. Not for revenge, not for what they did to us personally, but for all the families they've robbed and everyone they're planning to hurt. What do you want to do? I'd been formulating a plan for days, but hearing about their accelerated timeline forced me to commit to a course of action that felt like jumping off a cliff. I'm going to call them tomorrow and ask for a reconciliation dinner. I'll tell them I was wrong about journalism, that I want to apologize and discuss joining the medical practice like they originally planned. You think they'll believe that after what happened at graduation? They're narcissists, Marcus. They'll believe it because they want to believe it. They think they can control anyone with the right combination of pressure and manipulation. And then what? Then I'm going to get them to confess everything on tape. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly a minute. Augustus, that's incredibly dangerous. If they realize what you're doing, I know. But it's the only way to protect you and get justice for all the families they've hurt. I can't let them escape and leave us to take the blame for their crimes. What do you need me to do? That question, asked without hesitation, despite the risks involved, reminded me why Marcus had always been my hero growing up. He was willing to trust me and support me, even though my plan could destroy our entire family. I need you to contact the FBI Financial Crimes Unit tomorrow morning. Tell them you have evidence of charity fund embezzlement and that you're cooperating with an active investigation. Don't mention the recording plan, just establish contact and let them know something big is coming. Consider it done. After hanging up with Marcus, I called Professor Williams and explained what I needed from him. This is extremely dangerous, Augustus, he warned. If your parents suspect what you're doing, they could become violent. And if something goes wrong with the recording, you might not have enough evidence to prove their crimes. Professor, I appreciate your concern, but this might be the only chance to get justice for all the families they've stolen from. I can't live with myself if I let them escape. He agreed to help coordinate with media contacts and law enforcement, understanding that sometimes journalism requires personal sacrifice to serve the greater good. As I prepared for what might be the most important and dangerous day of my life, I realized that my parents had inadvertently created their own worst nightmare. They'd tried to destroy my journalism career because they feared my investigative abilities. Instead, they'd given me the motivation and skills to expose them completely. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes you believe anything is possible. I stood in my apartment bathroom practicing facial expressions in the mirror, while Sarah watched from the doorway with worried eyes. Remember, you're a remorseful son who's realized the error of his ways? She coached me for the dozenth time. You're not the investigative journalist who's uncovered their crimes. You're Augustus, the prodigal son, coming home. I nodded, trying to channel the emotions that would make my performance believable. The hardest part wouldn't be lying to my parents. The hardest part would be suppressing the rage and disgust I felt every time I thought about their betrayal. At exactly 9 a.m., I called my father's office. Augustus Cardiology Associates, this is Janet speaking. Hi, Janet, it's Augustus. Is my father available? I need to speak with him about something important. Janet had been my father's receptionist for 15 years. She'd watched me grow up, always asking about school and treating me like family. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry about what happened at graduation. Your parents are just worried about your future, you know. If only she knew the truth about what my parents were really worried about. Actually, Janet, that's why I'm calling. I think I made some terrible mistakes, and I want to make things right with them. She transferred me immediately, and my father's familiar voice came on the line. Augustus. His tone was cold professional, like he was speaking to a stranger. Dad, I know you're angry with me, and you have every right to be. I've been thinking about what you said at graduation, and I realize I made some very selfish decisions. Silence on the other end. I could practically hear his mind working, trying to decide if this was genuine or some kind of trap. I'm listening, he said finally. I threw away 4 years of medical preparation for a career that's going nowhere. I embarrassed our family publicly. I disappointed everyone who believed in me. I let my voice crack slightly, adding just enough emotion to sound authentic. I want to fix this, Dad. I want to find a way back to medicine if it's not too late. Another long pause, then, what exactly are you proposing? Could we have dinner tonight? You, Mom, and me, I want to apologize properly and discuss how I might still join the practice. Maybe I could start as an administrator while I prepare for the MCAT. I could hear him breathing, weighing the offer. My parents' egos were their greatest weakness. The possibility that they'd been right all along, that their prodigal son was finally coming home, would be irresistible to them. Your mother and I will discuss it, he said. Call back at noon. When I called back, my mother answered. Augustus, your father told me about your conversation this morning. Mom, I'm so sorry for everything I put you through, the lying, the deception, the embarrassment at graduation. I know I hurt you badly. Her voice softened slightly. You did hurt us, sweetheart. We only wanted what was best for you. The irony of that statement, coming from a woman who'd stolen from sick children and planned to frame her own son for her crimes, almost made me laugh out loud. I know that now. I was too stubborn to see it before. Well, your father and I have talked, and we've decided to give you one more chance. Come to dinner tonight at 7. We'll discuss your future and see if we can find a path forward. Thank you, Mom. Thank you both so much. I won't let you down again. After hanging up, I called Marcus to confirm he'd made contact with the FBI. I spoke with Agent Jennifer Torres from the Financial Crimes Unit, he reported. She's very interested in our charity fund concerns and wants to meet with us Monday morning. But Augustus, she warned me that if we're planning any kind of confrontation with Mom and Dad, we should be extremely careful. Did you tell her about tonight? I mentioned we might have additional evidence soon, but I didn't give her specifics. She said to call immediately if we felt unsafe or if anything went wrong. Next, I contacted Professor Williams to coordinate the media side of the plan. I've reached out to my contacts at the Tribune and WGN News, he told me. They're very interested in a story about medical professionals embezzling from children's charities. But Augustus, they want to make sure this isn't just a family dispute that got out of hand. Professor, by tomorrow morning, will have evidence that will prove every allegation beyond any doubt. The final step was setting up the recording equipment. I'd borrowed professional-grade audio devices from the journalism department, small enough to hide, but powerful enough to capture clear conversations even in a large room. The wire I wore was virtually invisible, tucked under my shirt with the microphone positioned near my collar. A backup recording device went into my jacket pocket, and a third device was hidden in my car as insurance. As evening approached, I dressed carefully, in the conservative clothes my parents preferred: khakis, button-down shirt, navy blazer. I looked like the son they'd always wanted me to be, the medical student who would carry on their legacy. If only they knew I was about to destroy that legacy completely. Sarah drove me to my parents' house because my hands were shaking too badly to trust myself behind the wheel. Are you absolutely sure about this? She asked as we pulled into their circular driveway. Once you start this recording, there's no going back. Your family will be destroyed. I looked at the house where I'd grown up. where I'd learn to walk and talk and dream about my future. In a few hours, this place would just be a crime scene evidence in a federal investigation. They destroyed our family when they decided to steal from sick children, I said. They destroyed it when they planned to frame Marcus and me for their crimes. I'm just making sure the truth comes out. I kissed Sarah goodbye and walked up the stone pathway to the front door. My mother opened it before I could knock, wearing a smile that looked almost genuine. "Hello, sweetheart," she said, embracing me carefully, like she wasn't quite sure if I was still angry. "I'm so glad you called." "Hi, Mom. Thank you for giving me another chance." My father appeared in the doorway behind her, his expression more cautious but not unfriendly. "Augustus, come in, let's talk." As I walked into the house where I'd spent 18 years of my life, I reminded myself that this wasn't about revenge or anger anymore. This was about justice for all the families my parents had betrayed and protection for Marcus and me. The recording devices were running. It was time to get my parents to confess to their crimes. The dining room looked exactly as I remembered from childhood, mahogany table set, with our finest china crystal glasses, catching light from the chandelier my mother had imported from Italy, fresh flowers arranged in the centerpiece vase. Everything perfect, elegant, designed to project success and stability. It was the ideal setting for a confession that would destroy all those carefully constructed appearances. My mother had prepared my favorite meal, herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables and wild rice. The irony wasn't lost on me that she'd gone to special effort for what she believed was my homecoming dinner, when it was actually an elaborate trap to expose her crimes. "This looks incredible, Mom," I said, taking my seat at the table where I'd eaten thousands of meals as a child. "Thank you for going to so much trouble." "Well, this is a special occasion," she replied, settling into her chair with a smile that seemed genuinely happy. "Our son is finally coming home." My father poured wine for himself, and my mother then offered me a glass. "I think I'll stick with water tonight," I said. "I want to keep a clear head for our conversation." For the first 20 minutes, we made small talk about the food, the weather, neighborhood news. Normal family dinner conversation, except for the wire recording every word and the federal case I was building against them with each passing minute. Finally, my father set down his fork and looked directly at me. "Augustus, your mother and I have been talking about your request to join the practice. Before we can consider that possibility, we need to understand what changed your mind about journalism." This was my opening. I leaned forward slightly, arranging my features into an expression of remorse and newfound maturity. Honestly, Dad, graduation was a wake-up call. Standing there with that journalism degree, seeing how disappointed and angry you both were, made me realize I'd been living in a fantasy world. "How so?" my mother asked. "Journalism doesn't pay well. The job market is terrible. Most of the work is just reporting on celebrity gossip or rewriting press releases. It's not the noble profession I thought it was." I paused, letting genuine emotion creep into my voice. I threw away 4 years of pre-med preparation for something that'll never provide financial security or make a real difference in people's lives. My parents exchanged a look that suggested my performance was working. "We tried to tell you that, sweetheart," my mother said gently. "We only wanted to protect you from making a mistake you'd regret forever. I know that now, and I'm hoping it's not too late to fix things." My father leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Well, I know I can't just jump into medical school after focusing on journalism for 4 years, but maybe I could start by working at the practice, learning the business side while I prepare for the MKT. I could help with administrative tasks, patient relations, maybe even some of the charitable work you do." The mention of charitable work made my father's expression shift almost imperceptibly. A brief tightening around his eyes, a slight change in posture. My investigative instincts told me I'd hit a nerve. "The charitable work is quite complex," he said carefully. "It requires a lot of experience with financial management and regulatory compliance. I'd love to learn about that side of the practice, I pressed. I know you manage funds for the Children's Hospital. That must be incredibly rewarding knowing you're helping families in crisis. My mother's wine glass paused halfway to her lips, another micro expression of tension. It is rewarding, she said, but it's also a tremendous responsibility. We're managing other people's donations money they've given to help sick children. The accountability requirements are extensive. Perfect. I was drawing them toward the exact topic I needed them to discuss. That's exactly the kind of meaningful work I want to be involved in, I said. After spending 4 years writing about trivial topics, the idea of actually helping families afford medical care for their children sounds incredibly fulfilling. My father set down his wine glass and looked directly at me. Augustus working with charitable funds requires absolute integrity. Every dollar has to be accounted for. Every distribution has to be documented and verified. There's no room for mistakes or casual handling of money. The way he emphasized absolute integrity while sitting across from someone he'd been preparing to frame for embezzlement was so hypocritical, it took all my self-control not to laugh. I understand completely, I said. I'd want to learn proper procedures from the beginning. Maybe start with small responsibilities and work my way up as I prove myself trustworthy. Well, my mother said, your father and I have been discussing some changes to our charitable fund management. We're thinking about expanding the program, taking on additional responsibilities. My pulse quickened. This sounded like they were planning to increase their theft before escaping to Costa Rica. What kind of expansion? I asked. We've been approached by several other hospitals about managing their charitable funds, my father explained. It would mean handling significantly more money, but also helping many more families. Translation, they'd identified additional sources of money to steal. That sounds like an incredible opportunity, I said. How much additional funding are we talking about? My parents looked at each other again, some kind of silent communication passing between them. Potentially several $1 million annually, my mother said, but it would require restructuring our entire operation, new procedures, different oversight arrangements, updated legal documentation. And my father added, it would mean expanding the team. We'd need someone we trust absolutely to help manage the increased workload. I felt like a fish swimming directly toward a hook, except I was the one setting the trap. I'd be honored to be part of something like that, I said. When are you planning to implement these changes? Soon, my father said. Within the next few days, actually. The timing of your call was quite fortunate. My mother nodded enthusiastically. We've been finalizing arrangements all week. Everything should be ready to launch by Monday. Monday. The same timeline Marcus had overheard them discussing for their escape to Costa Rica. That's exciting, I said. What exactly would my role be? Well, my father said, warming to the subject, initially you'd help with fund transfers and distribution management, making sure donations reach the right families, coordinating with hospital billing departments, that sort of thing. And eventually, my mother added, you could take over more of the administrative burden. Your father and I aren't getting any younger, and we'd love to step back from some of the day-to-day responsibilities. They were describing their exit strategy in real time, painting it as a generous opportunity for me, while actually setting me up to be the fall guy for their crimes. This all sounds wonderful, I said. But I have to ask, how do you handle the stress of managing so much money? I mean, what if something goes wrong? What if funds get misallocated or there's some kind of accounting error? Another exchanged look between my parents. Well, my father said slowly, the key is having proper documentation for every transaction. As long as you can show where money came from and where it went, you're protected from any accusations or problems. And my mother added, it's important to have trusted partners who understand the complexity of charitable fund management. People who won't panic if there are temporary discrepancies or unusual circumstances. I could hardly believe they were essentially explaining their criminal methodology to me, while thinking they were recruiting me as an accomplice. Temporary discrepancies, I asked. Sometimes there are delays in fund transfers, my father explained. Money might need to be held in interim accounts while paperwork is processed, or there might be urgent needs that require immediate funds while donation confirmations are still pending. My mother nodded. The important thing is making sure everything balances out properly in the end, even if there are short-term irregularities. They were describing money laundering and embezzlement in terms that made it sound like standard business practice. That's when I decided to push them toward a complete confession. This is all fascinating, but I have to admit I'm curious about something. Marcus mentioned that you've been asking him to sign additional paperwork for fund management. Is he going to be part of this expansion too? The question hit them like cold water. Both parents suddenly looked uncomfortable. Marcus has been very helpful with administrative support, my father said carefully, but his role will be more limited going forward. Why is that? My mother fidgeted with her napkin. Well, your brother is focused on his medical practice. He doesn't have time for the extensive involvement that charitable fund management requires. Plus, my father added, we think you might be better suited for this kind of work. Your journalism background means you understand documentation and attention to detail. The irony was staggering. They were praising the same skills they'd been trying to sabotage for years. But what about all the paperwork Marcus has already signed? I pressed. Will that transfer to me, somehow? My parents exchanged their most nervous look yet. Those were just preliminary documents, my mother said quickly. Nothing that would create any ongoing obligations for him. Actually, my father said, we're planning to restructure everything completely. Clean slate, fresh start, new procedures. Clean slate because they were planning to disappear and leave Marcus holding forged documents that would make him appear responsible for their crimes. I decided to go for broke. Dad, Mom. I have to be honest about something. I've been researching charitable fund management online, trying to prepare for this conversation, and I came across some concerning information about embezzlement in medical charities. It made me worried about the legal risks involved in this kind of work. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. What kind of information? My father asked, his voice tighter than before. Articles about doctors who got in trouble for mismanaging charitable funds, people who meant well but made mistakes with documentation or fund transfers and ended up facing criminal charges. Those are rare situations involving people who didn't follow proper procedures, my mother said quickly. Right, but how do you protect against that? How do you make sure there's no way anyone could accuse you of improper handling of donations? My father leaned forward. Augustus, the key is making sure that if anyone ever questions your practices, you can demonstrate that you are following established procedures and working within legal guidelines. Even if sometimes the procedures are, I paused, pretending to search for the right words, flexible. Exactly, my mother said. Sometimes rigid adherence to bureaucratic requirements can actually prevent families from getting the help they need quickly. The important thing is serving the charitable mission, even if that means working around administrative obstacles. They were confessing to crimes while convincing themselves they were describing virtuous behavior. So if money needs to be moved between accounts temporarily, or if there are delays in documentation that's just part of effective charitable management, precisely, my father said, as long as the ultimate goal is helping families in need. Temporary irregularities are just practical necessities. And if anyone ever questioned those irregularities, you'd have documentation showing the charitable intent behind every decision. Of course, my mother said. We keep meticulous records of every transaction and every decision. I had them. They just confessed on tape to embezzling money from charitable funds while describing their crimes as standard business practices. But before I could process what to do next, I heard the sound that would change everything. Car doors slamming in the driveway. Multiple car doors. My father's face went pale as he recognized the sound too. Through the dining room window, I could see unmarked sedans and men in FBI windbreakers walking up the front pathway. Augustus, my father said slowly, his voice deadly calm, what did you do? The recording devices were still running, capturing everything, as my parents realized they'd been trapped by their own son. The next few minutes unfolded like a scene from a crime thriller, except this was my real life imploding in real time. Heavy knocks echoed through the house as my mother stared at me with growing horror. "Augustus, what have you done?" Before I could answer, my father's expression transformed from confusion to cold fury as he put the pieces together. "You recorded this conversation. You set us up." "Robert and Patricia Augustus," came Agent Torres's voice through the front door. "This is the FBI. We have a warrant to search these premises." My mother jumped up from her chair, panic replacing shock. "We have to destroy the computers," she whispered urgently to my father. "The files, the accounts, everything." But my father was staring at me with the kind of rage that made me genuinely fear for my safety. "You sanctimonious little snake. After everything we did for you, everything we sacrificed to give you opportunities. Everything you sacrificed." I stood up, no longer caring about maintaining my cover. "You stole money from sick children. You tried to frame Marcus and me for your crimes. You sabotaged my career for years because you were afraid I'd discover your theft. We protected you from your own stupidity," my mother hissed, moving toward the kitchen where I knew she kept important documents. "Journalism is a worthless career that would never provide financial security." Agent Torres's voice came again. "Mr. and Mrs. Augustus, please open the door immediately." My father grabbed my arm roughly. "You're going to tell them this was all a misunderstanding. You're going to say you made everything up out of anger about graduation." "I'm not protecting you anymore," I said, pulling away from his grip. "I won't let innocent families pay for your greed." That's when my mother completely lost control. She lunged at me, screaming, "You ungrateful brat! We could have all been wealthy. We could have lived like kings." The front door burst open as FBI agents flooded into the house. Agent Torres, a compact woman in her 40s with steel gray hair, took control of the situation immediately. "Robert Augustus, Patricia Augustus, you're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes." My parents' reactions revealed their true characters under pressure. My father tried to maintain dignity, straightening his tie and attempting to negotiate. "Agent Torres, I believe there's been some misunderstanding. My son has been struggling with mental health issues and may have misrepresented some routine business practices." My mother chose a different strategy, pointing at me while screaming, "He did it? Augustus has been managing our charitable funds. Check his bank accounts. Check his signatures on the documents." Even facing arrest, they were trying to execute their plan to frame me. But Agent Torres held up a small recording device. "We've been monitoring this conversation for the past hour, Mrs. Augustus. We heard your detailed confession about embezzling funds and setting up your sons as scapegoats." The look on my parents' faces when they realized their own words had condemned them will stay with me forever. Shock, rage, disbelief, and finally a kind of defeated acceptance. That's when Marcus arrived, having followed the FBI to the house. He walked through the front door just as agents were placing handcuffs on our parents. "Marcus," my mother called out desperately, "tell them Augustus is lying. Tell them we never did anything wrong." My brother looked at her with profound sadness. "Mom, I've seen the evidence. I know what you've been doing. I know you were preparing to frame both Augustus and me for your crimes." The betrayal in his voice seemed to hit her harder than the handcuffs. As agents escorted my parents toward the door, my father turned back to me one final time. "You've destroyed this family," he said quietly. "I hope you can live with that." "I can live with stopping you from hurting more innocent people," I replied. "I couldn't live with myself if I'd let you escape." Over the following weeks, the investigation revealed the full scope of their crimes. They'd stolen over $400,000 from children's charity funds over 3 years. The money had funded their luxury lifestyle offshore accounts and planned escape to Costa Rica. But the investigation also uncovered something even more disturbing. They'd been planning to expand their operation targeting charitable funds at 4 additional hospitals before disappearing. If I hadn't exposed them, they would have stolen millions more dollars from families dealing with children's medical crises. The legal proceedings moved quickly. Faced with overwhelming evidence, including the recorded confession from our dinner, my parents accepted plea agreements rather than risk trial. My father received 8 years in federal prison. My mother got 6 years. They were ordered to pay full restitution to the families they'd robbed, which required liquidating all their assets, including the house cars and luxury possessions. The story became national news when it broke 3 weeks later. Medical dynasty built on stolen charity money ran on the front page of the Chicago Tribune. CNN picked up the story, focusing on how the children of corrupt parents sometimes become the instruments of justice. Professor Williams helped me secure a position at the Tribune's investigative unit, where my first assignment was covering white-collar crime in healthcare. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that my parents' attempts to destroy my journalism career had actually launched it in spectacular fashion. Marcus thanked me repeatedly for saving his career and reputation. The medical board investigation concluded that he'd been an unwitting victim of his parents' manipulation, and he was cleared of any wrongdoing. He decided to continue running the cardiology practice, but under new management that emphasized transparency and ethical behavior. Sarah stood by me through the entire ordeal, even when media attention made our lives complicated. She helped me process the complex emotions of exposing my own parents, reminding me that love sometimes requires difficult choices. The most meaningful moment came 6 months later when I received a letter from Maria Santos, a single mother whose daughter had been battling leukemia. She wrote, "Mr. Augustus, because of your courage in exposing your parents' crimes, my family received the $3,000 that had been stolen from us. That money paid for my daughter's medication during her final round of chemotherapy. She's been cancer-free for 2 months now, and I believe your decision to seek justice helped save her life. Thank you for choosing what was right over what was easy." Reading that letter, I realized the full impact of what my parents had done. They hadn't just stolen money, they'd stolen hope from families in their darkest moments. They'd taken resources that could mean the difference between life and death for sick children. But I also realized something profound about my own journey. For years, I'd been afraid of disappointing my parents, afraid of not living up to their expectations, afraid of not being the son they wanted me to be. The truth was that their expectations were built on a foundation of lies, manipulation, and crime. Breaking free from those expectations didn't just save Marcus and me from being framed for their crimes. It freed me to become the person I was meant to be, someone who stands up for truth, protects the vulnerable, and refuses to compromise integrity for personal comfort. My journalism career flourished as I specialized in exposing corruption and protecting victims of white-collar crime. Every investigation I completed, every story I published, every criminal I helped expose was a testament to the choice I'd made that night at dinner. The life lesson that emerged from this devastating experience became the foundation of everything I did afterward. Real love doesn't enable destructive behavior or protect people from the consequences of their actions. Real love requires the courage to do what's right, even when it's painful, even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to be complicit in someone else's crimes, even when that someone is family. My parents chose greed over integrity, manipulation over honesty, and self-interest over the welfare of sick children. When I chose justice over family loyalty, I wasn't betraying them. I was refusing to be corrupted by their choices. Today I sleep peacefully, knowing that my decision helped return stolen money to families who needed it, prevented additional crimes from being committed, and sent a clear message that no one is above accountability, regardless of their social status or family connections. The graduation slap that humiliated me in front of 3,000 people became the catalyst for a journey that taught me who I really was and what I was capable of achieving. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives create the opportunity for our greatest triumphs. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? How do you handle situations where the people you love are asking you to compromise your values? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Subscribe to hear more stories about courage, justice, and finding your true path even when it means walking away from everything familiar. And please share this with anyone who might need to hear that sometimes standing up for what's right requires standing against the people we love most. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, your integrity is the one thing no one can take away from you, unless you give it away willingly.